Hi, Tara Kiesling here with Together We Will. I'm here with Darlene Rogers, a candidate for judge. She'll talk about the area that she's running for, who her constituents are a little bit later. Again, this is Together We Will, and we're in a live interview, so if you have any questions for Darlene, feel free to click on the video feed and put your questions into the comment section. We do ask that no other candidate or campaign staff for a candidate ask any questions. We'd like to keep this open to the constituency. And if you enjoy this interview, we have a few others with Cincinnati City Council. We have some with Cincinnati School Board. We'll have more in the future with more judges, more Cincinnati School Board, and I think a couple more City Council people coming up. So if you enjoy things like this or know anybody who does, please feel free to invite your friends, let them know about what's going on, and feel free to comment and maybe tag them in the comments if you know anybody who's interested. If you again enjoy these interviews, you can check out the Together We Will page and give us a like. We also have a Twitter at TWW Southwest at SWOH. I couldn't remember if Cincinnati was in there or not, but Southwest Ohio, so TWW SWOH. Again, feel free to ask questions at any point. I have a live feed in front of me and I can see your questions and I can ask them right here now. So if you're interested in learning more about Darlene after this interview, her website is rogersforjudge.com. It's ROGERS for judge.com. Her Facebook is Darlene Rogers for Judge, and her Twitter is at Rogers for Judge. So feel free to check her out on her social media pages. Give her a like, give her a little star if you like any of her tweets. Darlene earned her BA from Northern Kentucky University and became a teacher. She taught for a total of 10 years at Indian Hill Middle School and McNicholas High School. She became a real estate business owner in 1999 and attended the Thomas M. Cooley School of Law in Lansing, Michigan. She worked as a criminal defense attorney in Hamilton County, and she also worked as a public defender in Hamilton County. As a public defender, she co-created the anti-bullying campaign, where she gave presentations to students, school administrators, and faculty on how to organize and prevent bullying behaviors. She was appointed by Sheriff Jim Neal as a real estate appraiser for foreclosures, and she's a solo law practice, Rogers Law Office, LLC. Darlene is also an active member of the Human Rights Campaign and the Cincinnati Lawyers Club. I did forget to introduce one person, and we have Lindsay. She's our amazing interpreter from Cincinnati State here as well. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Cincinnati State. When Lindsay taps out, Betsy from Cincinnati State also will be tagging in and will be continuing the interpretation. So thank you both for being here, and I apologize for not introducing you sooner.
Thank you.
Darlene, do you have anything you'd like anybody to know as way of intro for yourself and for the audience?
I am Darlene Rogers. I am running for Hamilton County Municipal Court this year, November 7th, 2017. And I keep emphasizing this year because it's an odd year election and many people are not in the election frame of mind.
Yes.
You know, it's not a midterm, it's not a presidential year, so less than 30% of folks typically turn out in odd year elections. So our goal, of course, is to get folks to come out in droves this year in November.
Yes, a lot of people don't even know that election is happening in November, but it's happening in November. Look it up. It may affect you, and it may affect you more than any presidential election because this is your home. This is where you live. Anyway, that's my little spiel on it. There are some general questions that people may have. I know that a lot of people, when they end up voting, they may look into their state reps, they may look into the president, they may look into city council. They don't always look into judge. So these general questions may help people figure out what they need to know and what they need to be asking of judges in the future and possibly even now.
Right.
So what would you like voters to know about what municipal judges do?
I have a hard time saying municipal also.
Yes, that will happen again, I'm sure, throughout this interview.
We have several courts in Hamilton County. You have your small claims court, and then you have your municipal court, and then your common pleas court, then your court of appeals, and so on. Municipal court covers all misdemeanor cases, low-level felonies, some drug offenses, some code violation, ordinance type things, protection orders, and that's mostly on the criminal side, but municipal court also covers civil cases, which people don't often think about. Most people think about the criminal aspect. But civil cases ranging, and civil cases means a money decision, a money order. So whatever the case or controversy is, the money amount has to be $500 to $15,000 to fall into the municipal court jurisdiction. Then anything $15,000 and above would go to common pleas court.
So why is it important for people not only to vote for a municipal judge, but to be well informed as to who they're voting for?
It's super important to know judges and what judges do, and to vote for judges.
Darlene Rogers, candidate to who they're voting for. It's super important.
So voting for judges matters. Many folks don't vote for judges. So last year we had the huge countywide presidential election year where nearly 1 million people in Hamilton County are voting, or at least a huge percentage, because not everybody votes. But 70 to 80,000 people dropped off. People that voted did not turn the ballot over and vote for the judges at all. So 70,000 was the least, and that was in my race. I ran last year for judge and came within 3%. So out of 1 million people, I lost by 9,000 votes. But 70,000 people who voted did not vote in my race, and 80,000 didn't vote in any of the judicial races. And to me, that's a heartbreaker, because I've met people since that said, oh, if I had just met you last year, if I just knew, but I don't know who judges are because it's nonpartisan. So there's no D for Democrat or R for Republican or I for Independent. So they just see names, and many people aren't informed. And I remember years ago when I was younger, looking at names, thinking, well, there's a woman's name, or, and I was not informed, so I'm not judging anyone. But it really would have made a huge difference if those 70 to 80,000 people would have voted for judges. We would have all won. Out of 7 judicial candidates running last year, 2 won. And I was the next closest. I was the closest, and then everybody kind of fell in, and everybody campaigned so much throughout the entire year, countywide. I mean, it was an incredible amount of work to campaign. So yeah, we would have just really appreciated if folks would have gotten to know us. And you're knocking on doors, but it's really tough to knock on 1 million doors.
Yeah, that's definitely a heartbreaker.
It is. It is.
What should progressive voters in particular look for in a judge?
Well, I'm a progressive. I consider myself a progressive. And I guess I would consider myself a liberal. I'm pretty liberal. But I feel like I'm fiscally conservative. I feel like, women's issues matter a huge amount to me. I think for progressive voters, you want a judge who's going to be fair to everybody who comes into the courtroom. So if it's an African American who comes into the courtroom, if it's a white person, if it's a wealthy person, if it's an indigent person, that there is no difference, that everyone is treated with dignity and respect and gets their fair day in court and gets treated with dignity, and their family members are treated respectfully, and they feel like when they left court, whatever the decision happened to how it happened to turn out, that they feel comfortable. Well, at least I got my day in court. I got my say. My family members got their say, if that's appropriate. And that women come into court and that a judge treats them respectfully. I have knocked on so many doors, and I've spoken to so many female attorneys in Hamilton County who I'd never met ever in my life, who said they were scorned publicly by a certain judge who said, "Why are you wearing a pantsuit in my courtroom?" Seriously. And do you know how many women? 3 different women, 3 different female attorneys told me this same judge said that to them in a court of law. And they're professionals.
Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, did you hear that? That is crazy. And it doesn't matter, progressive voter or not, every judge should be fair to everybody who comes into their courtroom.
Amen.
They just should be, but that's, I guess, not how the world works, totally.
It is not. It is not how the world works in Hamilton County, always. We have some fabulous judges. We have fabulous court personnel. We have fabulous deputies. But there are definitely some stinkers that are not fair to anyone except people that look exactly like them. That's what we don't want.
Ladies, get your pantsuits out. It's time. We do have a few questions from the audience already in. So one of them is, can you give some examples of how judges can influence people's lives?
Well, I think judges need to be very immersed in our communities and our neighborhoods and be out and about speaking and promoting fairness and tolerance and all the things we speak about it with the anti-bully campaign of, going into schools and various community centers and speaking with folks of, how a court of law works. So it's not this scary, intimidating, forbidding place. So whether you're called for jury duty or whether you're maybe challenging a traffic ticket or anything, that you feel comfortable going into a court of law. And I think judges getting out and speaking in the community and going into, all these different situations, rec centers and all these folks where, folks can come up and speak with them, ask them questions, I think will do a world of good and make folks much more comfortable understanding and approaching our court system.
Yeah, it seems like more than anything else, the position of judge has this level of accessibility that people don't know how to get over. The city councilman, you can email them or go to their office, but with a judge, it seems like there's some sort of block there that exists.
A barrier.
Yeah.
There's, and some of that, a judge has to be impartial and, a judge cannot have ex parte hearings with one side without the other present. So there are some rules involved. But, when you're out of the court of law, when you're just mingling with folks in our neighborhoods and communities, I think it's good to have discussions. And folks can just ask questions how it works and to be a little accessible, out of a court of law.
Yes. We have another question from the audience here. What have been the most effective methods for improving court procedures and efficiency, and what other methods would you suggest?
What have been effective?
Yeah, for improving court procedures and efficiency.
Well, I was speaking with retired Judge Nadine Allen just a few weeks ago, and she was sharing with me, which I thought was incredibly interesting. She was sharing with me how she set about purging ancient warrants. And I, like you probably think, what? What are ancient warrants? And she had to go through city council and she had to go through all these hoops because once she explained it, it saved taxpayers so many dollars. We have ancient warrants on the books that could be up to 10 years old where maybe there was a domestic dispute and, wife called police came, filed charges against husband, boyfriend, and it could be the other way around. And then somebody was supposed to go to court. And then somebody doesn't go to court, and then there's a warrant for this person's arrest. Well, those stay on the books for years and years and years unless they're purged. And it costs so much money because, so this person may be driving somewhere, then they're picked up, and then they're hauled into court, and then they're put into jail first, then they probably lose their job, then they're hauled into court, And then we have to pay witnesses $12. We have to get the victim, alleged victim. Well, the victim doesn't care anymore. The victim's, in her example, the victim had divorced the guy and was already remarried to somebody else. I mean, she didn't care. So, but we have witnesses. We have police making overtime money to come in, and this happens so frequently. And then ultimately, and he's kept in jail $65 a day, and ultimately it's all dismissed. But if we can purge those old ancient warrants, that saves taxpayers quite a bit of money. So that's one thing that's working.
What issues, going back to more of the general questions, what issues are most important for a Hamilton County municipal judge right now?
Well, what's completely overwhelming Hamilton County, specifically more than any other court system, is our heroin opioid epidemic. And it is, Sheriff Jim Neal, I read just this morning, that was declaring a state of emergency because our jails our Hamilton County justice system is beyond overcrowded. It was built for 875 inmates. It currently houses over 1,400 inmates. They got these, they call them like boat beds. They're these stackable plastic beds that they put down because there's so many heroin users specifically. Well, now they're just laying on the floor. I'm hearing that they're out of those.
That sounds incredibly
portable.
Inhumane.
Well, and the trouble is, and see, it's not, the Sheriff's Department can only do so much because our judges and our court system in Hamilton County keeps doing the same thing of, let's just put every heroin user we come across in jail and hold them for anywhere 90 days to 6 months, and we're paying $65 a day for these folks to be held. And the jail has come a long way. The jail has created a heroin pod for female inmates, which has been given high acclaim by many other folks in other counties. But we're the hardest hit. Ohio has the largest heroin problem of the entire country, Ohio specifically. So our jails are being overrun. We have a huge amount of heroin users dying and overdosing. We have all of our EMS and our firefighters and our police trying to save people that are overdosing and carrying Narcan. And I just heard the coroner, Dr. Samarco, saying sometimes it takes 14 doses to bring people back, that because it's laced with fentanyl and there's all these issues with heroin. It's such a tragic thing. Then we have our Jobs and Family Services being overrun by all the children who are left behind, their parents who have overdosed, or they've been taken away by their parents, from their parents who are still addicted. And so in Jobs and Family Services, we have children living in the offices of Jobs and Family Services.
Wow.
I mean, in the offices. Wow. I mean, it's a huge, huge issue. And it's really tough to speak about much else because it's such an issue. And my whole stance on the heroin epidemic is that we've got to get our heroin addicted folks that are coming before the court. If they are completely nonviolent, they need to be not in the jail, but they need to be in treatment facilities getting treatment. Lockdown facilities, whatever it takes, they need to be in treatment. And I've gone, judges have to educate themselves on this problem. I've gone to seminars hosted by hospitals, by treatment facilities. I was at a treatment facility in Mason, and there's all kinds of methods and things that are working. But it takes our judges, our elected officials, to get up to speed, to get educated, and to work and collaborate with all of our agencies in Hamilton County to solve this. It really does take a village, and it's going to take all of our elected officials working together. And I really feel like judges are integral in that solution.
Right, and you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result from that either. It's
Exactly.
kind of crazy.
That's exactly right.
Just so everybody in the audience knows, if you have any questions for Darlene Rogers, she's running for municipal judge in Hamilton County. Just click on the video and add your question in the comment, and I'll be fed them live, and I can ask you right here. So another general question that people in the audience might like to know the answer to: what geographic area would you cover if elected?
I will, if elected, I will be a Hamilton County judge countywide. So any offense, any civil lawsuit that is filed in the entire county would come to me if it's a municipal court jurisdiction case. Now, to vote for me, this is the tricky part. In odd year elections, the county is broken up into 7 districts. And this was done because it was a group of African Americans that filed a lawsuit that our judicial candidates, our judges, should better reflect the diversity of our county. So the county was divided into certain districts so that more minorities, more women, more other than white men would get elected, to the bench. And so for my district is pretty much the southeast corner of Hamilton County. So it's everything from southeast downtown to Mount Adams, Norwood, Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, Oakley, Mount Washington, Marymount, Fairfax, Anderson, Newtown. So everyone who resides in those neighborhoods, I will be on their ballot come November 7th this year.
And if you win, you would be the judge to everybody else in Hamilton County?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's just that way. It's just divided that way to get more diversity on the bench.
Where would your courthouse be?
The courthouse is Hamilton County Courthouse. It is the main courthouse, which is 1000 Main Street. It backs up to Sycamore Street. On the other side of Sycamore Street is the Justice Center and the Sheriff's Department.
So the courthouse downtown would be?
Correct.
Okay. How do municipal court proceedings differ from higher court proceedings?
Well, they're pretty much the same. It's just a matter of the jurisdiction of what cases would be held in each of those courtrooms. Municipal court hears preliminary felony cases, all the misdemeanor cases, low-level felonies, etc. So otherwise, a judge has great discretion of how many cases he or she can handle in a day and what their workload is daily for the whole week. There are some judges, whose name I will not mention, who take off every single Friday and do not ever work a full week. I will not be one of those judges. I will work a full week. I will work a full day every day. And here's the problem with judges setting a very light schedule for themselves, is that you can have somebody locked up for driving with a suspended license who might wait 2 weeks for the judge to hear their case. And we have an overcrowded jail, of course. We have, so we have nonviolent offenders who should not ever, in my opinion, with our emergency situation in the jail especially, we have nonviolent offenders who we should have some diversionary alternative programs. And they're there. We have electronic monitoring, GPS monitoring. We have work release. We have treatment facilities. We have homeless shelters. We have other options that folks should not just be sitting in the jail waiting for the judge to hear their case. And and the judge might take a 2-week vacation. This happens a lot. We just don't hear about it, but it does.
So the jail becomes more of a catch-all.
Yes.
For anything.
Yes.
So the caseload kind of leads into the next general question that people are wondering. How heavy is the current caseload, and how does the caseload affect how judges approach individual cases?
Well, and caseloads vary dramatically. Caseloads depend on how many folks law enforcement has arrested. Caseload depends on if the jail has held them or if the jail has released them because of overcrowding or because of a multitude of reasons. But if it's a moderate arrest weekend, if the jail's held on to them, I mean, a municipal judge might hear 50 cases a day, but that is discretionary. They will typically set that out well in advance of how many cases they're going to hear. But it does vary dramatically by law enforcement and the jail of what comes before the court.
Interesting. So we have another question from the audience here. Filmmaker Ava DuVernay explores the history of racial inequality in the United States, focusing on the fact that the nation's prisons are disproportionately filled with African Americans. What are your thoughts on this topic, and what can you do to change this disparity?
Well, that is a issue that is near and dear to my heart and is totally true. There is an enormous disparity between our African American population and our white population. I mean, not just African Americans, but minorities in general versus white. And as a former public defender, I cannot tell you the injustices I personally witnessed. That, I was a school teacher. I was a normal citizen like anyone else. And unless you're in a court of law day in and day out to witness these things, and that's the trouble. Many, average folks just don't realize these things happen, these inequities, these injustices. But where you really can see the difference is bond hearings. In one of my first cases, I was a student attorney, and we had to get permission to go on the record and represent indigent clients. And there was a group of us that were in this one courtroom for the whole semester. So we got well acquainted with the judge and the system, and we thought this a white male judge, we thought he was pretty fair overall. But one day, two defendants came before him for bond, and the white defendant was accused of beating a prostitute with a hammer so badly that her hand was going to be permanently disfigured. So you have a violent white man, and the prostitute was an African American woman. So you have a white on black crime. And he was given a $1,000 bond, which we thought was incredibly low. And then a black gentleman, an African American defendant, comes up right next. And he's accused of pressing on the screen of a white woman's screen. So now we have a black on white offense.
Oh my gosh.
But he's not touched her, he's not harmed her. He was pushing on the screen, so he was up to something, obviously. He was arrested and she called police. And so the judge said, and we saw their records, they were pretty equally situated. The judge said, well, who knows, he may have been there to rape her. So he gave him, there was no evidence, there was nothing in the facts that suggested rape. So he gave that gentleman a $10,000 bond. So you have a 10 times the amount, and the white guy was clearly a violent person who's beating a woman with a hammer, and the other guy's probably breaking and entering. But the black gentleman got a bond 10 times higher than the white person. And that's, I mean, I have hundreds of those, I could tell you. And I'm telling you, I battled and battled as a public defender in our criminal justice system. And I'll tell you more injustices real quick. For a good deal of the time, the prosecutor his dad was the judge. His dad was the judge.
Yeah, that seems fair.
So he was the judge that we would appeal to. He was the higher judge, the higher ranking judge.
Yeah.
So if we felt like there was a discrepancy in the facts or the ruling wasn't lawful, we could appeal to a judge who was that prosecutor's dad. And so I have to tell my client, an indigent defendant, that we can appeal, and I will, but it's the guy who just put you here's dad. And that was perfectly acceptable in Hamilton County. It was perfectly acceptable.
So from our discussion, what I'm gathering is if I hear a lot of people who don't vote for judge because they don't know why it matters, and they don't feel like, well, if I don't get in trouble, what does it matter if I'm voting on judge or not? But if you care about social justice issues, it matters a lot who your judge is and what they believe in and their morals and where they'll stand on whatever line you think that they should be standing on. So I would encourage everybody to get to know the judge that's on your ballot, because it may not matter to you directly or to your family directly, but it matters to society and the place that you live in.
Well said.
That's
good.
Hearing that, I had to interject something.
It's true. I mean, I could go on and on, but go ahead.
Well, I think people need to know how it connects to them a lot, and sometimes with a position like that, there's not always a clear connection. We have another question from the audience. You mentioned public defenders representing indigent clients. I understand that for some misdemeanor cases, the right to a public defender is not federally guaranteed. Is that an issue in Hamilton County Municipal Court?
Yes, it depends on the crime. It does depend on the crime. Whenever your liberty is at stake, you have the right to a public defender. So anytime you are facing incarceration, you have the right to a public defender. And that can be for a multitude of crimes. So in most cases, if they qualify financially, they have to show their financial documents to qualify for a public defender. If they qualify financially, they will have the right to a public defender. And otherwise, they can always, there are many contract attorneys that they would have a list that are reasonable. There are other options. But the public defender is guaranteed for folks whose liberty is at stake.
Thank you. So another general question we have coming up, and then there will be more questions about why you're running and things like that. Okay. So what problems with our municipal courts need to be addressed, and how would you address them?
Well, my issue is that we need folks working a full day in a full week. We as ordinary citizens and taxpayers and voters, we all work 40-hour weeks. And I personally feel like our elected officials should be expected to work a 40-hour week. That our elected officials should shut down their practices, that they should not have some part-time gig, that they should be completely devoted to public service and doing the best they can do for our communities, for our county, and ensuring that everybody's case gets heard in a timely manner.
That sounds fair. Why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Well, I was always interested in working in communities and public service, and I enjoyed teaching very much, but I really felt like I wanted to do more and be more involved and have a role where I made a bigger impact. And so I taught, and I made so little money that I also had a real estate business as well. So I worked all the time. and I really thought my life would be simpler as an attorney, and that I would have many other options and make more money. Which is funny because my first job I made less. As a public defender, I made less than I did as a teacher. Yeah. But I felt like I would have more impact and could do more things. So I had an offer to buy my real estate business, and so I sold it. And then I thought, okay, now I have a little chunk of money. What do I want to do if I could do anything? And then I thought, well, I kind of can do anything. Yeah. And I always wanted to be an attorney, and I never felt like it was really in the realm of my reach. You know, my first job in life was a factory worker for General Motors at 20 years old. And it never felt, my dad was a factory worker and a part-time police officer. Going to law school when I was young, 20s, it never seemed like a possibility. So later in life, I decided to sell that business, and I sold my house and I moved to Michigan, where I was given a little scholarship, and I went to law school.
What appeals to you about being a judge?
Well, what appeals to me about being a judge is definitely changing the image of our courtrooms. I think having judges that will be fair and impartial to all people and respectful to all people, and having progressive judges, I think is very, very appealing to me. And that I can maybe fix some things that are broken, that I can fix some things where people aren't going to be treated the way I just described I've witnessed, that I'm going to stop that bad behavior, that at least in my courtroom. And you know, and if you get enough good people, I just feel like the energy, the dynamics will change. And we have a lot of judges and we have a lot of elected officials that have inherent biases that really don't even realize their decisions are racially motivated. But that's my goal, that there's not going to be any rich man backroom dealing in my courtroom. There's not going to be anybody treated badly in my courtroom. And that's what's appealing to me. And that's really why I'm even doing this. I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, I've had to practically shut down my business. I mean, you know, campaigning is no easy thing. You know, last year I was swiped in the face with a Trump flag. I was accosted a couple different times. I mean, it's brutal. It's brutal. If I really didn't feel like I could make a huge difference, and then hopefully encourage other good candidates to get out and run, because we have a lot of these races where these Republican judges have run unopposed year after year after year. So we have to encourage good progressive candidates to get out, campaign, get involved, and run for office.
And unfortunately for them, Hamilton County is going blue.
Yay! Finally.
What are your specific judicial philosophies?
Well, you know, the basic tenets of being fair and impartial, the hardworking ethic, you know, just moving the slate forward. Getting good judges in that's going to provide that fair and balanced courtroom for everybody.
You've sort of touched on this question a little bit. What approach will you take with drug offenders, including those who commit crimes motivated by addiction? I don't know if there's anything more you want to say. I know you've touched on this a little bit.
Well, I'm not. I think there needs to be complete reform. And it's been discussed. Even Supreme Court Justice Maureen O'Connor talks about that we are not going to arrest our way out of drug issues. And even and these are Republicans, even Pat DeWine was saying we're not going to arrest our way out of the heroin issue. So we know what's not working is arresting people and just locking them up. It's not solving anything. And I'm not a fan of mandatory sentencing. And that goes back to our racial disparity. I feel like many of those laws originally were put on the books to lock up African Americans. You know, stricter laws for crack, stricter laws for cocaine. And all that did effectively was to put so many more African Americans in jail and in prisons in such a disparate amount that they are completely unfair and wrong. So I'm against all the mandatory sentencing. And for non-violent folks, I really feel like heroin users specifically and non-violent drug users should be in a lockdown facility with drug treatment. Like it's not up for discussion, and they're locked in. Because we've learned, I heard Judge Heather Russell speak that she sentenced several women to the cat house for heroin treatment, and they leaped out of moving vehicles to keep from going, even though they promised they were going to go and they were going to participate. If they're not locked in and locked in when they get there, they're going to flee. And then it's just, you know, the vicious cycle. So that's what I feel about drugs.
We have another question from the audience, and I'd like to remind everybody, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, just feel free to click on the video and add your question in the comment section. Can you give your thoughts on the Ray Tensing trial or the issues of fairness highlighted by this case?
Well, we have to be very careful about speaking about an actual case. And I would just first say that my comments would be just my opinion at this moment, and I would remain neutral and open if any of these issues ever came to me in a court of law. You know, it's we have a person who was shot to death because he was missing a front license plate. I mean, that's what it comes down to me. I think if he was a white person sitting in his car, that police officer probably would have never approached his car to begin with. Just my opinion. And then I think it's very unfortunate because I think this officer perhaps was not trained as well as he could have been or should have been. Being a campus police officer, I think he was afraid, and I think he just was not well equipped to handle the situation. And I mean, why he would ever pull out his gun? If a person's going to flee, you let him flee. You radio it in. It's a license plate missing. So I think it's very unfortunate for both sides. You have one person who's dead, who did not deserve to be shot and killed, and then you have the police officer facing murder trials, which a murder charge, which I think is excessive. He didn't wake up that day thinking he was going to murder somebody. I think he should be criminally charged with something, but I just wonder if that was a deliberate tactic to make sure it was a hung jury, that no jury would ever convict him of that. I don't know. Just completely speculating as a bystander. But I don't know any of the specific personally or directly.
Moving on to more code violation questions. Do municipal judges hear cases having to do with code violations?
Yes.
Do you believe homeowners should be arrested and or serve jail time for code violations?
No, we just had sweet Pastor Mingo, who's a lovely, wonderful person, who is a hardworking community activist and in the community, who I think they threatened to put in jail, or actually did put in jail, because his retaining wall was crumbling. Well, it was horrible. I just couldn't even believe it. And Mayor Cranley, I understand, went and intervened to get him out of jail. I think that is an absolute horrible way to have treated him and to treat any citizen. Now, I would say, though, the only I would counter that with if somebody had a fire code violation where you're actually putting people's lives in danger, or you have a horrible tenement building, or a junkyard where there's harmful chemicals and you've been warned and cited to clean it up or fix it. If it's something of that nature where you're endangering the community, that's a different matter. But to put somebody like Pastor Mingo in jail because his retaining wall was crumbling onto his neighbor's property, I think was just a terrible act.
How can we ensure people care for their property but not under the threat of arrest? Do you know of any better solutions, or do you have any better solutions?
I think I think you start with notices and fines. I think that's the typical thing to do. I think, I work for the sheriff, and we go to foreclosed homes all the time. We go to probably 60 to 80 homes in a week to put notices of foreclosure and evaluate homes. So we see notices that have been there from cities, from ordinances, from townships, from the county. We see them all plastered on their door and things. I think you start with that, with the basics of notice, fines, and then I think you get the community involved. And you're going to have to spend some tax dollars, potentially, to mow somebody's grass that's 3 feet high. If it's, if it's a disabled person or if it's an elderly person, sometimes there's reasons that, they just don't have the resources. So I think getting the community more involved and maybe digging a little bit to find out what the situation is, why the house looks this way, or why they're letting the house fall down around them. And if it's encroaching on the neighbor, and you maybe, I was just at a Norwood City Council meeting last night where they were giving awards to Eagle Scouts who were cleaning up their neighborhoods and improving the communities. I think there's ways to reach out to others to help with the solution rather than locking up good, decent people that maybe just don't have the means to fix up their place.
In an overcrowded jail. We're coming up on the last few minutes of this interview. We have a couple more questions left, but if you're sitting in the audience and you have a question to ask Darlene, please let me know. Just put it in the comment section and I'll read it out loud. So moving on, what is the current role of plea bargains in municipal court?
Well, plea bargains are used extensively. The judges, the court system encourages plea bargains because if every single person required a trial, we would be so backlogged. And civil cases are backlogged 2 years or better to have a civil case heard because they take a back seat to a criminal charge because we have the right to a speedy trial and that type of thing. And so we do encourage plea bargains, and the downside with plea bargains is that sometimes a defendant might be pressured into taking a plea versus having his or her day in court. I know as a public defender this came up quite a lot, and especially we have an indigent person who's being charged. In my example here, we have a minority, perhaps a person of color, and I can tell them right now they're probably going to be found guilty of this charge. And the trouble is that I've had many a defendant say, but I really am innocent. I really am innocent. And as the attorney, all I can say is I'm happy to go to trial, but if we lose, you're going to face multiple charges, or you could just take this one lower charge and plead guilty. And that's just a shame, and that's the nature of our system. And I really do feel like if judges managed their dockets better and had full days, they could hear more trials and perhaps should hear more trials. And that if somebody actually is an innocent person convicted, that they feel the right and have the liberty of having an actual trial. So I think that's the way it should be. But currently, it's mostly plea bargains.
Interesting. If you weren't running for the bench, what questions would you ask of municipal judge candidates?
I would ask if all of their experience is as a prosecutor, because 90% of our judges came from the prosecutor's office. I mean, nearly all came from the prosecutor's office. And to me, that's a disservice because as a prosecutor, they've worked with law enforcement and with judges to only prosecute defendants. They really don't have never experienced witnessing the other side, practicing on the other side as a defense attorney, and perhaps seeing both sides. So it's just having a person with just this kind of tunnel vision who goes from the place of a prosecutor to one step up to being judge, and then you'll often see them go back, because I hear I probably shouldn't say all that, but I hear there's a judge maybe going to run for prosecutor next, and I just think, isn't that interesting that they're pretty well aligned already. And so you want somebody as judge that has a multitude of experiences, both civil and criminal, and it's been a public defender or defense attorney who's been on all sides and had many experiences. And
perspectives too, I would assume.
And many perspectives, yes.
Is there anything in conclusion you'd like the audience to know?
Well, I appreciate your vote. I appreciate everybody coming out November 7th. There is an election in Hamilton County. And please look at the whole ballot, turn it over, and on the back will be judges. And we'd appreciate you voting for me. Thanks.
This is Darlene Rogers. If you'd like to know more and you may have missed the beginning of the video, feel free to click on it again when we finish up here. You can also go to rogersforjudge.com, ROGERS for judge.com, and you can learn more about Darlene. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.